July 2025 here in Seattle and online, and in Australia. I've heard great reports from our Australian friends that they are having a great time, and they are getting some of the recordings for the sessions that are in the middle of the night for them, and they are enjoying that. So watch your collaborative note stocks for your sessions, because you may have asynchronous additions. So it's been a great first 2 days, and I want to thank everybody for the energy that you're bringing to every single room that you go into. I want to thank Brianna and Xander for kicking us off on Tuesday, really thinking about the role of individuals and the role of community in resilience, right? And I think that that was a perfect way to get us started for the week. We've just had 2 days of really engaging sessions. I personally have enjoyed sessions on having open conversations about navigating all the change that we are seeing, right? Whether it was a session with our federal friends, many of them online, talking about how do they work together and how do they provide notice on the changes that are happening on their end. Or I loved hearing directly from Alex, from CDAC, coming to us all the way from India, and giving us that firsthand perspective of his leadership and the resiliency and navigating the change and the migration that they had to do, right? Having that conversation, I'd heard about it in different places, but hearing from him firsthand was really, really inspiring and meaningful. Great conversations in different sessions about how the role that generalist repositories have played in some of this, this migration and this security and this catching of data, but also the critical role that specialist and domain repositories that are so important to this community play in the research infrastructure. And what does that mean for us going forward? And what do we need? How do we envision a future for our specialist and domain repositories who are vulnerable right now? Multiple people have told me over the last few days that while this meeting is smaller than it's been in a few years, the content and the energy and the passion in the room are not diminished. And I agree, and I thank you for that. And frankly, it's inspiring. Even in the face of adversity, amazing people come together and can do amazing things. And I think that it is the camaraderie and community that is what will drive us forward. Wow, okay. So this morning for our plenary, we have two great speakers for you. We have Jed Sundwall, the Executive Director of Radiant Earth, and Kate Thompson, ESIP's 2025 Raskin Scholar. So before we move into the plenary talk, I want to, I'm doing it ahead of time this time, unlike I did on Tuesday, scan that QR code for Slido. So as they are speaking and you have great questions that come to mind, you can pop them into Slido. You can vote up your fellow participants' questions that are really good so that we can be more efficient in our Q&A than I was on Tuesday. So please grab that. And with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about ESIP's Raskin Scholarship. Supporting our next level, our next Earth Science data professionals is really a core value of ESIP's. We do it with our Community Fellows program, and we also do it with the Raskin Scholarship. The Raskin Scholarship is an annual award made by ESIP to a current graduate student in Earth or computer sciences who has an interest in community evolution of Earth science data systems. The scholarship is named for longtime ESIP participant Robert G. Raskin, a pioneer in Earth science semantics, and seeks to promote collaboration, research support, and exposure for talented students in Earth and computer sciences. This year's award winner is Kate Thompson. She is a PhD candidate in the Thompson lab at the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her selection highlights her exceptional research, commitment to open science, and dedication to applying scientific insights for societal benefit. Kate will come and give us a first talk this morning, so please join me in welcoming Kate Thompson to ESIP.
Thank you so much, you so much for that really lovely introduction. As said previously, I'm Kate Thompson. I'm at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I'm so pleased to be here and able to join you all. I'm going to discuss today hyperspectral remote sensing and environmental contaminant-induced vegetative stress. And first, of course, I want to say thank you to the Raskin family and to ESIP for this incredible honor. It's been such a treat to join you all here and see the kind of the ESIP community in action and learn about all of the incredible work you guys are doing. So this has been just a spectacular opportunity, and I'm so grateful. And I'm opening up this talk with a slide from this is the Excel Nuclear Power Facility in Monticello, Minnesota. And I'm starting with this because nuclear power has been elevated in our national priority as this is a low-carbon energy source that we want to prioritize for the future as we confront the realities of climate change. And there's good reason for this. I would say that there's also a lot of unaccounted for waste streams that we're all culturally, I would say, pretty aware of. And at the same time, there's three contaminants that I want to talk about today. I'm working on copper, hexavalent chromium, and tritium. So copper is this has kind of a bimodal impact on vegetative functioning. It's an essential nutrient that requires, it's essential for plant functioning, but it's also toxic in excess. Hexavalent chromium is famous. If you know the movie Erin Brockovich, this was the contaminant that was featured in that film. It's wildly carcinogenic to people and moves very readily through water systems and the environment. So we care a lot about hexavalent chromium getting into the landscape. These are both really widespread industrial contaminants that are associated not only with nuclear power facilities, but also with other industrial processes. Anywhere that you have a large cooling demand, you also likely have hexavalent chromium in the landscape. Lastly, I want to talk about tritium, which is a beta emitter. It's a low energy beta emitter, which means that it can't penetrate through your skin and get into you. But if it does get into you through ingestion, through contaminated water or food, or it's absorbed into your skin, this is biologically damaging. And tritiated water is one of the most prevalent contaminants from nuclear power facilities. And so what I'm hoping to convey in this slide is that when we think about these nuclear emission or contaminant endpoints, there's big buckets that are pretty intuitive. Food and water is one that we kind of intuitively understand and are cautious about. Surprisingly, a lot of the work around human health and contaminants associated with nuclear power, as you might expect, it's very related to cancer and acute exposures. And we know so much less about how contaminated food and water supplies are exposing populations to chronic subacute doses and what the long-term impacts of that are. I would say that we know even less about how ecosystems are impacted. And if our plan as a nation and as a global community is to double down on nuclear power investment, we can expect that there will be much, much more of this type of contamination on the landscape. And we should probably know more about it before we make these kinds of decisions. So I'm a hyperspectral remote sensor. What does hyperspectral remote sensing kind of bring to this setup? And I think lots of things, but the task of my PhD has been to identify hyperspectral bioindicators or hyperspectral signals of vegetative stress that can be used as proxies for the environmental contaminants that we're interested in. And so that does lead me into a little bit of a primer on hyperspectral data. So this first panel is indicative of maybe what you might expect to see from multispectral data. The bands are wide, they are discontiguous, and we can do a lot with this. We have done a lot with this kind of data, but I hope it is clear that when you add hyperspectral data to the mix, you're working with a very narrow spectral band, so a fine spectral resolution, and the data is contiguous. And the diagnostic power of data like this is really kind of unprecedented in terms of what it can mean. This is if we can operationalize hyperspectral diagnostics for environmental monitoring at a large spatial scale, I believe this is truly transformative. Now, I will say I'm playing a little bit fast and loose here. I'm showing leaf level spectra on the right-hand side. This is not the same as aerial imagery, but for the purposes of this talk, it's good enough. The fine spatial scale, contiguous data. These are the benchmarks that you need for hyperspectral data. And I think the transformative power of this kind of data is even more apparent when you realize how much we know about what's available in a spectral signal. A lot of people have put a lot of effort into understanding what wave bands mean as relates to biochemistry and structural properties of vegetation. And this isn't all of them, but this is kind of my transition into functional foliar traits and how we can use them to understand something about plant responses to environmental contaminants. So if we think about what you need to do in order to be a tree, there's many things. This is a list of 3. And you need to photosynthesize, you need to invest resources to build your vertical structure, and you need to make defensive compounds to protect yourself, right? Of the traits that serve these functions, here's another very abbreviated list of traits that we're pretty good at measuring both in the field and through hyperspectral data. It's pretty intuitive that chlorophyll pigments and nitrogen content are very immediately related to photosynthetic capacity. And phenolics and tannins are these well-known compounds for preventing herbivory. These structural compounds of cellulose, and I want to make a call out to leaf mass per area. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. The way to think about LMA is cheap leaves versus expensive leaves. If you're a bean plant and you don't have to live very long, you don't have long to live, your leaf has one job, and that is to photosynthesize as efficiently as it possibly can. And if you're a succulent living in the desert somewhere, your leaf has a lot of jobs. It has to live a really long time, it has to sequester a lot of resources, and it has to keep those resources from getting consumed by other herbivores or other competitors. All of that versatility and longevity come at the cost of efficient photosynthesis. And so an LMA measurement gives you kind of a loose placement on big picture strategies that species make as they're evolving in different geographies and climates. So this is a very brief introduction to one of the multi-stressor experiments that I did in 2021. We grew a whole bunch of tall fescue and contaminated it with both either copper or hexavalent chromium. And I've included these two photos on the right-hand side. The top panel shows visible markers of copper toxicity. And if you know what tall fescue looks like, you would recognize that these leaves are they're visibly darker. It's a much deeper and kind of grayed out green. So there's been a pigment change of some kind. The leaves are also curling in on themselves, which is something that tall fescue does when it's drought stressed. So there's some kind of a water relations impact that's happened post copper treatment. The lower photo shows visible signs of toxicity post treatment with hexavalent chromium, and you see these yellow margins on the edges of the leaf. This happens in other species also. This is somewhat diagnostic of a hexavalent chromium toxicity. And I think it's just super cool that without any hyperspectral sensors, without any kind of measurements, we can see with our eyes that these two metals are being metabolically coped with. The stress response that's being elicited in tall fescue by these two metals are different. And we can see that spectrally. Oh shoot, this is not showing up as I hoped that it would. So apologies for the color issues on my slide, but the thing to understand is that each row in this figure is a different day of the experiment. And so the colored indices that are still coming through, these are wave band indices that are statistically associated with either a copper treatment in blue or a hexavalent chromium treatment in orange. And the green indices are statistically significant for both for a generalized metal exposure, but cannot differentiate between the two metals. So the only take home that I wanted you to take from this is that over the course of the experiment, the spectral indices that are relevant, they're not the same. They're not the same through time, and they're not the same between metal contaminants. And what this means is that there's a reason to believe that we'll be able to differentiate between these types of contaminants as hyperspectral sensors become more available in airborne and spaceborne platforms. The revolution is nigh. I think that this is very possible and terribly exciting. With that, I want to transition to my second project, which is done in collaboration with the Savannah River National Labs. We're working on tritium, which is an isotope of hydrogen. Tritium is important for lots of reasons. It's a very important waste component of normal nuclear power functioning. It's also an important input for fusion and for the hydrogen bomb. And so lots of reasons to think about tritium. But as I said before, this is because it's an isotope of hydrogen, it integrates readily into water molecules. And this means that it moves really readily through ecosystems and through biological tissues, which is a problem because when tritium decays, it releases an electron which will tear up DNA. It can damage cells structurally. This is a bad thing to have in biological tissues. This is a map that was done by Ohms et al. 2019, showing a distribution of tritiated water contamination in our oceans. And the colors to pay attention to are red dots are nuclear power facilities, and green and yellow dots are one of the higher concentrations here. What you see is there's higher concentrations of tritium in the North Atlantic and also around the island of Japan post-Fukushima. We have a lot of tritium in our ecosystems, and there's increasing interest in how we can understand this in non-human biota, the rest of life, and what this means for ecosystems as we navigate, a changing climate. Okay, so this is a few kind of serial images of my study site, the Mixed Waste Management Facility at Savannah River National Labs. This is the facility that's based in Aiken County, South Carolina, and this facility was used for nuclear fuel processing during the Manhattan Project. It is heavily contaminated with all the things, but especially with tritium. And the Mixed Waste Management Facility is a really interesting remediation project that started in 2000. And the idea was that there's groundwater plumes of tritiated groundwater that is escaping the premises to the Savannah River, potentially causing a hazard for downstream communities. The idea was to excavate. They were going to excavate a surface water, a reservoir pit, right, or a holding pond. The groundwater would seep into the pond and become surface water. Then they would use that contaminated surface water to irrigate a plantation of loblolly pines. The idea being that if you send water through these trees, they'll transpire, send the tritiated water into the atmosphere and away from people, which would be safer. This does not account for the fact that tritium binds to organic tissues. Only 2/3 of the tritium that goes through transpiration actually makes it into the atmosphere. The remaining third is sequestered in the loblolly tissues, where they enter biogeochemical cycling processes that arguably expose more biota at the surface to tritium contamination. This is a bummer of a remediation project. But there's a lot that we can learn, I think, about how tritium moves through environments. And let's see. So one of my early hypotheses was that tritium exposure would decrease mean LMA values. This is not what I found. In this first panel, we see that the mean did not change based on foliar tritium concentrations, which were very helpfully collected by our collaborators at Savannah River. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm low on time. There is, however, a change in variance. There's a statistically significant convergence towards intermediate values, and that's interesting. I can't explain that yet. This is a conceptual diagram just reflecting a project that I've co-developed with Ilkka Pölönen at the University of Jyväskylä as part of a Fulbright project that I'll be leaving for in just a few weeks. We're going to use the data that we've collected at Savannah River to do some radiative transfer modeling using Prospect. And the whole goal here is that Prospect was trained on, as far as we know, vegetation that was uncontaminated with tritium. So to the extent that our measured values, both in spectra and in leaf optical properties, deviate from our predicted values, we're beginning to constrain the kinds of deviations that we would expect to see in both those types of measurements. And with that, I want to take questions. Yeah, sorry, I went a little bit long. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Kate. Really important work, and thank you for sharing it with us. I personally grew up halfway between a Manhattan Project site and Love Canal. So thank you, because this is really important work. Can we get Slido up on the screen for questions? And all of you, while we're pulling that up, all of you in the room can go into Slido. We like to use Slido because that way it kind of equalizes things between being in room and being online in terms of being able to ask your questions and get them out there. And if we can't get it on the screen, I'm going to grab someone's laptop really quick. Excellent. So we'll take that one right at the top. What happens to tritium in the atmosphere? Does it come back to land as rainfall somewhere else?
I couldn't tell you the proportionality that's where that's happening. So tritium in the atmosphere moves around and operates a lot like water. Tritium is naturally occurring in very, very small amounts in the upper atmosphere. And so there's much higher concentrations, and they come down somewhere. I think folks who are doing atmospheric stuff who aren't me probably would have a more thorough answer on that. But I can say that a lot of nuclear fallout ends up in the Arctic. And so I couldn't tell you how well we've quantified where it's coming down.
A lot of people in this room I know care about the Arctic for sure. So how do you communicate this to nearby communities? Is that part of your work?
I would love it to be. Right now, I feel like the work is sufficiently preliminary. We're still kind of figuring out what we can and can't do. And so it feels a little bit early to me to communicate this as a real tool. That is absolutely my goal, though. My desperate hope is that we have bad actors that are corporations. We have bad actors that are potentially other countries. My work is largely funded through the Department of Energy. They're interested in this because they would love to fly a satellite over North Korea and have some understanding of munitions testing and what kind of development is happening, that may or may not be illicit. I'm interested in this because I think that this is a tool that is super operationalizable for communities to hold government to account. I'll just share an anecdote, if I may, that in Monticello, Minnesota, that Excel nuclear power facility that I showed in the top of my talk, they had a leak they had a tritium leak for an unknown period of time. They calculated it to, I believe, 14 curies in total. And regulators and the company buried that information for about 2 months before they made it public. And this was contaminating surface waters that ultimately feed drinking water supplies to the Twin Cities, which is my hometown. And it's really tough to take claims that, like, the Department of Energy and the nuclear industry are like in a new day when stuff like this happens. It's frankly, it's a betrayal of trust when the government doesn't feel like it can or should communicate openly with its residents. And I believe tools like this that could be made available would be transformational in both vetting and quantifying the kinds of changes that we may or may not see, right? I mean, might be that tritium is perfectly fine within certain levels, and but it would be great to see that in, like, actually manifested in our ecosystems and have something other than governments and regulators who have not had a terrific track record be the ones conveying that information. I'm sorry, that was a long answer. Get them, guys. Yeah.
I'll go with the next question, and this is definitely the data focus of this room for sure. How do you expect to collect your hyperspectral data?
So there's lots of options. And somehow I still wish there were more. So the thing that we've been really excited about for my advisor, Phil Townsend, has been really excited about for a long time is the SBG satellite. That has been paused for the time being, which is really sad. But the beauty of the SBG mission is that we would have, it would work like Landsat, right? Wall-to-wall coverage, maybe a 16-day return period, 30 kilometer resolution across the globe. That would be incredible. There are on-demand satellites operated by other governments. The German aerospace group, DLR, has released Nmap data, and the Italian satellite is called Prisma. These are, you have to put in requests. These are on demand only, but have been really crucial steps in building the hyperspectral community in terms of like talent and data capacity. And of course, kind of the bread and butter for a lot of us hyperspectral folks is airborne sensors from airplanes. And my group has connections with the local DNR, where we've customized one of the Cessna planes that they use for spotting wildfires. And depending on season, we can get a hyperspectral camera in there, and they'll fly imagery for us, which has been wonderful. The Avarice missions are also doing stuff. I believe there's a mission in New York right now that's, yeah, the Avarice missions are really cool. NEON, of course, is probably the most systematically available data. This is limited to one flight annually over the NEON domains. And that's amazing imagery because it's 1 meter resolution and comes with all of the biodiversity and species composition data that kind of comes with the NEON domain study site.
Great. Can you speak to the broader context of contaminants from power production? How does this compare to, say, coal or other sources? Yeah, and I think this is a really smart question and one that I am still trying to wrestle with. I think clearly it's not good news to live near coal power plants, and I think we have a tough time comprehending and even more so communicating relative risk. Obviously, I flew here, but I'm sure some of us at least drove here. Driving is one of the most dangerous things that any of us do in a given day, and yet it's tolerable because of the functionality that it serves, and we have a really hard time kind of integrating. There's a cognitive dissonance that comes with this kind of information, and the nuclear industry is very much like fighting, working upstream, right? There's a real push to make the nuclear industry look more friendly, and there's
it's true that people who are maybe irrationally afraid of flying should chill out, and also plane crashes do happen. I wish I had a good answer. I don't. I really don't. And relative risk assessments are really hard. And the way that I would say nuclear safety folks think about risk is, I think there's a lot to be said for the for acting cautiously, and where you have a zero tolerance for failure, where a Fukushima is unacceptable, you probably can't apply normal rules to it. And this is well outside my scope and expertise, so I should stop there.
Great question, though. I mean, it's something, these things get complicated, right? And then last question, if someone wants to know about making your data open to the public, and what are your thoughts on that?
So all of the NEON data is already publicly available as it's processed. And no, my lab group is really excited to share data and code bases. The Townsend lab, I'm not affiliated with those software developments, but the Townsend group has developed hyperspectral processing software, including FluxBRDF and HiTools. And these are available on GitHub. The FluxBRDF methods have been integrated into NEON's final stage of their end-use products. And so we're big believers in sharing both data and code. And yeah.
Thank you. If everybody could help me give a hand to Kate. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. When I think about our theme of innovation to impact, right? The innovations in research, the innovations in data that's available, the innovations in the way that we are looking at our planet and how we look to, sometimes we want to increase impact, but sometimes we want to decrease the impact too, right? And I think that might be a case where wouldn't we love to decrease the impact that we're having as humans on our planet? So thank you, Kate, for that. I'm glad you could join us. So next, it's my pleasure to welcome Jed Sundwall to speak to you all. Jed's someone I've wanted to have talk to ESIP for a while, and that there's a few reasons for that. Jed, like me, Jed started his career in international development work and has an economics and policy background. And I love bringing people with different backgrounds into a room like this, where we've got so many different scientific and computer science backgrounds, but just different ways of thinking about the challenges in front of us. But also with the theme of innovation to impact, I have long been a fan of Radiant Earth and all the work that they're doing. Jed occasionally will reach out to me and say, hey, where's ESIP on this? Because we're thinking of going in this direction. And I've usually just said, go for it. That sounds awesome. So I'm thrilled to have Jed talk to you about the work that they're doing and inspire us. So come on, Jed.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And it's great to follow Kate. Our mission at Radiant Earth is, am I hitting the right button? I think so. The green button. There we go. So our mission at Radiant, what the heck? There we go. All right, is to increase shared understanding of our world through data. So it's kind of weird, like, a few months ago there was this scuttlebutt about, Trump was going to rescind the nonprofit status of environmental nonprofits and stuff like that. So I went to our website and was like, wait, do we talk about sustainability or climate? Are we going to be targeted for this? And weirdly, even though we do work a lot on sustainability type stuff and climate type stuff at Radiant, we don't talk about it on our website. And I think I sort of attribute this, I mean, I know exactly why this is the case. I was actually an English major, which is, I feel really weird admitting that in this room. But so language is really, really important to me and to us at Radiant. We want to be very precise about what we're doing. And climate and sustainability are very, very broad, vague terms that allow just for a lot of different interpretations. So we really frame our work in terms of how can we improve global cooperation through data. That's the goal. is we want to just make sure that we have a shared understanding of our world so that we can understand, like, what is tritium doing to us? And we can have a shared understanding of that. So following Kate here was wonderful. It's just amazing to see the constant progress that's being made. So we have three focus areas. One thing, we're building a thing called Source Cooperative, which is a data publishing utility. So one of our beliefs is that publishing data is still too hard. It's especially really hard at scale. And so and I'm also, just to show my cards here, I spent a long time at AWS building the Open Data Program. Chris is here, carrying the torch for that. But I've become convinced that object storage is a commoditized, very powerful technology that is really, really good for sharing data at just about any volume. But if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say object storage, don't feel bad, because still most people don't know how to use it. They don't know how to take advantage of it. So Source is the utility we're building to try to make that easier for people. And then we have a thing called CNG, and this is where I'm always asking Susan, I just want to make sure that we're complementing one another. But it's another forum for geospatial professionals, but it's the Cloud Native Geospatial Forum. So it's for those people who are really pushing forward in the cloud and modern ways of working with data to come together in a vendor-neutral context and talk about what works and what doesn't work. And that's fun. And I have stickers for CNG if anyone wants a sticker. First come, first serve. And then at Radiant Earth, just broadly, we do want to incubate new initiatives. We have offered fiscal sponsorship in the past for projects that produce novel data products and are pushing on the things that we want to do. So, but what I'm going to talk about today is just like, where does data come from? What are the institutions that we relied on for data for a long time? Last fall, I taught a class at the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs. So it's their foreign policy school, where my background is also in foreign policy. And the class was called Planetary Scale Data Institutions. So this is what you're getting here is like, how much time do I have? Like the whole semester you're gonna get right now. But it was a fun class because I had studied policy and then I've worked really pretty deeply in tech for a long time. And so to go back to these policy students, where when I got my master's in 2006, I was very frustrated that my school wasn't talking enough about the internet. They weren't talking about technology infrastructure that was already in 2006 very clearly overwhelming the world and changing everything. And weirdly, policy schools still today aren't talking about the internet enough. They don't quite understand it. And so while they're there learning about the Sustainable Development Goals and lofty plans to use data to improve the world and improve the state of governance, they don't quite understand the plumbing of that data. And so you all aren't going to be surprised by a lot of this stuff, but I think it's still worth looking through. So first of all, I really like this slide because it is fun to see the sensors, and what's also fun is to see the people here. So this is why I don't want to get too weepy or anything like that, but like humans are so awesome at this. We want to know more about our world. We figure out how to build these sensors. We go out into the ocean and chuck them into the ocean, and that's an Argo buoy. We go put in stream gauges and things like that, and fly balloons. It's something that we do. It's like in the human genome to be so curious about the world, and I think it's just wonderful that we do this. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of the Landsat satellite with a person in it, but you get the sense. And satellite imagery is always awesome. I just can't not put in imagery. This is from Himawari, and so you're watching a volcano erupt as the sun sets, or rises? No, as it sets. Yeah. So anyway, it's just spectacular. Now, there's another funny thing though, is that where a lot of data comes from, and a lot of data that informs policy comes from humans. It comes from people and institutions, and this is a law that I live by. This is from Edward Tufte. It's not. I call it Tufte's second law, which is roughly people and institutions cannot keep their own score. And I'm hesitant to do this because I just don't want to get too political, but like, do you know what the official number of Epstein client lists is? It's 0. The official number of Epstein client lists is that there are 0 of them. Okay, that's the official number. You can't really trust many institutions to report accurately on things. And and I think Kate's talk also, the stories about how regulators and the power plants, like everyone has frequently strong incentives to not report the truth. So a lot of data that comes out that we supposedly rely on that are coming from reports and filings and things like that, we have to be skeptical of them. This is I love this chart. I mean, I sort of feel like, everyone's seen this. Okay, I think a lot of people recognize this right away. First of all, I'm 6 feet tall, and I'll leave it to you whether or not you believe me on that. But it's just really great. You would think that if you asked 200,000 people how tall they were, you'd get a normal distribution. But it turns out there's a lot of people who are 6 feet. It's just striking. Maybe another curious thing about the human genome. So all this to say is, and I don't think this room, of all the rooms out there, I don't need to hammer this home, but we do need to be very skeptical of data, and we need to consider the source. And I also don't want to say that all sensor-based data is always, is perfect and pristine. We all know that it's not. There are always issues with this, but we have to be very, very careful with data that's being reported by people and institutions. It's a social fact that I think we just need to accept. So who uses the data? Again, I don't need to belabor this with you all, but it was very fun for me, again, to teach this and just sort of explain, this data gets used everywhere. It gets used to do things. It has very practical purposes that are important to the economy. It's not an accident that NOAA is part of the Department of Commerce. We don't have an agricultural sector. We don't have a logistics sector. We don't have aviation, any of these things, without accurate information about our world. It helps us see the future. But then I think, very important for this room, and it's something that I really want to underscore, is that it also just helps us be curious. One thing, a huge caveat I always want to give when I give this presentation and talk about these things is that I don't only believe that data should just be instrumental, that it should be for something in the market. I think there is such value, and it's almost to the point of I almost want to say it's sacred, it's very important that we hold space and create opportunities for us as humans to just ask weird questions about the world and just figure stuff out. So fly sensors and learn things that we didn't know before. There's this ever receding, I forget who to attribute this quote to, but the ever receding horizon of ignorance or something like that, we're always going to be learning that there's more that we could know about our world. But that said, data is used very practically. Now, this next slide, I've got curious to know if anybody can guess what it is. Who recognizes this kind of sensor? Yep, a rain gauge. Somebody said it. It's a rain gauge. Oh, Kate said, okay. So it's hard to see in this photo. This is a special kind of rain gauge. It's a rain gauge that someone put a bunch of silicone glue into. They just squeezed a tube of glue into it. This is an interesting thing about how data gets used. It also gets used to govern and to steer the economy. So the USDA has a program where if you're a farmer and you're affected by drought, you can get, it's like a parametric insurance type thing. I don't quite understand it. But if you have a few hard years from drought, you can get a payout. And they're like, well, look, we're not going to go out and audit every part of the country to see if there's a drought. We've got sensors for that. And so a couple farmers were like, where are these sensors? And they went and they just sabotaged the sensors. It's just it's an unbelievable deal. This guy's how much does a tube of glue cost? The hardware store, a couple bucks. They were getting paid millions of dollars in insurance payouts. Anyway, they're in jail now, so it's all good. But the point is though, is that governing people with data is hard. Governing people is hard, right? And so we want, we all, I would think, probably want to use more data to have a better understanding of our world and make better decisions, but humans are difficult to govern. And they'll find ways to mess with stuff. Now, this is interesting. We were at dinner last night, and it was at the happy hour. Somebody mentioned this. It was Doug. Yeah, thank you, Doug. Thanks for reminding me. It's too many conversations. But we were talking about, so there are also, as we use data and gain new understanding of our world and regulate based on that, there will be winners and losers, right? There are people in positions of power or people who have economic incentives that are going to be buffeted, by these changes. And this is an amazing quote. This is from, I think it's Matt Eby, I think that's his name, but the CEO of First Street Foundation. This was in a trade magazine, a real estate trade magazine, talking about so if you don't know what First Street Foundation is they do risk model analysis, and then they sell that data or otherwise have partnerships with like Zillow and Redfin and banks and things like that to help people understand like how should we be valuing property throughout the country based on flood and fire risk and other things like that. And so Matt gives this quote to this trade magazine. He's like, yeah, our research found that homes at risk are 3 to 4% cheaper, which is like kind of awesome, because we're like, great, we're using data to actually understand how the market should work, understand how real estate should work. But it's just like such a wild statement to make, because what he's saying is like, yeah, our data knocked 3 to 4% of the value off of a bunch of people's houses. And if you're in a community or a town that you know where all those houses are, you're like, wow, our tax rolls are going to go down. Like, I don't want to believe this number, you know. And so suddenly, whatever magic that First Street Foundation is doing is going to be very scrutinized and kind of has enemies. People are going to be like, well, how can I disprove this? I now have an incentive to kind of disprove this. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like, it's good to have the scrutiny and have this kind of debate. And the truth is that, you know, First Street Foundation's numbers aren't magical. They're not perfect. And we're all feeling our way in the dark here. But the important thing to point out is that this is hard for people. It's hard for people to accept this kind of information. As an aside, I'm rereading Jurassic Park right now, and it's very deftly written in that, like, as the evidence of what's going on in Costa Rica is kind of like spreading out in the world, and the reports of some kind of new lizard that's biting people, how Crichton is able to, like, really writes about cognitive dissonance really well, because people receive the information and they're like, I'm just going to choose not to believe this, because having to believe it would be really annoying for them, and it would have, you know, it would have so many implications that they're not willing to confront. And, you know, Kate mentioned cognitive dissonance. Like, that's what we're always up against. And then the other issue is that, you know, so we're producing all this data. We hope it's going to be used. I often talk about what I call imaginary decision makers. When you're talking about data that, you know, ideally some person somewhere who's in power will see the data and then they'll do what they're supposed to do. This doesn't always happen. We have to be very, very thoughtful about how decisions get made. I was talking to Eli Holmes last night. She's telling her story about when, you know, starting to do research on, I think, seals or something like that. Anyway, sea lions, that's right. And learning that that her research was actually going to have an impact on lawsuits. It was going to make its way into courts to make, you know, where decisions were going to be made about policy. We really have to think all the way through the implications of, like, how our data can be used. But we have to also be realistic about this. And so this is some sad news a little bit about, like, the UN and a lot of, like, international climate accords have been trying so hard to herd these cats of nation states to be like, hey, want to try a little bit harder to not emit so much? And they just can't seem to do it, you know? Nation states' imperative is to grow their economy. I mean, that's kind of like one of the primal, you know, the most important things they have to do. And for better or worse, our economy is largely built on carbon, you know? So if you are growing your economy, if there's more money being spent, that usually means more emissions. And so this is a very, very hard thing to do. And so as we create all this data and have this understanding of our world and use that to set targets for different countries, it's still running headlong into political decision-making processes that are really, really tough to overcome. So anyhow, so we have all this interesting data infrastructure. It's being used and applied in interesting ways to, you know, sometimes to good effect. Where does it come from? The truth is, and I'm very proud of this, is that the United States has disproportionately funded most of this data. You know, most of the, you know, Europe, they're really giving us a run for our money. I think I'm pretty jealous. I'm pretty jealous of their satellite program. You know, there's some good friendly competition between us and Europe. And when we talk about global observations, it's mostly the US, Europe, and Japan. You know, the Argo buoys, there are a lot of people that contribute to those, but it's still mostly the United States. And I'm proud of that. And I'm also obviously worried about that because of demagoguery. So demagoguery it's a great college word. Demagoguery is a feature of democracies. So one thing I want to make clear, even though I've made fun of Trump, I think twice now in this talk, is that, like, it's not just Trump. Like, this is always an issue with governing, is when politicians have an incentive to curry favor or win votes on vibes. just getting people scared of stuff, getting them riled up about all sorts of things. It's we're in America right now. We know this goes on all the time, right? And so unfortunately, it does have these like spillover effects onto epistemology, where we Americans have lost confidence in science. This has been going on for a while. A lot of this was triggered by the pandemic, and I would also argue a lot of cognitive dissonance, where people were like, "Oh, these scientists are telling me things that I don't want to hear, so I'll just choose to not believe scientists." And here we are. And just all this to say is that what I said before, governing humans is really hard, and you can't quite do it on data alone, especially when you can be outgunned by vibes, by demagogues that are able to steer the population and therefore steer votes and therefore steal funding away from science. And that's the reality that we're living in right now. And then can we see if we can play this? This is just, I'm just throwing this in here because it's fun. So humans. I don't really know what was going on there. All I know, so there's a thinker who's really influenced me and had a huge impact on me is a guy named Jim Scott, who died last year. He wrote a book called Seeing Like a State. It is fantastic. If you haven't read it, it's just an incredible book. He also wrote a book that I haven't read, but I've skimmed a bit of it. But the title alone is incredible. It's Weapons of the Weak. And he studied, basically, a big part of his research was studying populations that resist state governance. So the state is growing more powerful, it's starting to govern them, and they figure out, how do I revolt against the state? And this is just a perfect demonstration of sort of weapons of the weak. It's something that we have to, I just sort of keep this video in mind because it's so crazy. But we will try to deploy more and more sensors. There are nation states and organizations will try to figure out how to gather the truth about the world and impose that on the world, and people will resist it. And I'm not saying, I'm really not trying to make a normative statement here, whether or not that's good or bad. I just think it's sort of a fact about people, is that they will resist being governed in a lot of contexts. And it's just, I think it's something that we need to keep in mind, especially those of us, and I include myself in this, that are very optimistic about the value of data to help us change our behavior and become better. No, we don't have to watch it again. Okay, and so all this to say is that I think we're in a situation right now that none of you, this doesn't need to, there's no surprise to anybody, but that we're confronting both institutional and market failure at making the most out of the data that we have in the world. And public institutions are not doing so hot for a lot of reasons right now, but also the capital markets and the venture capitalists and people who've tried to build business on this, they're also having a hard time with it. And I just chalk this up to the fact that the economics of data are very difficult and tricky to figure out. We haven't figured it out. So we are. That said, I'm very optimistic, and I don't want to be glib about anything, but I am very optimistic about where to go from here. So one funny thing about this concept, the name of my course, which is Planetary Scale Data Institutions, is that we already have planetary scale data institutions. So one point I didn't really underscore, and maybe it wasn't clear enough, is that one issue of relying on nation states or relying on the US government to furnish all of this global data is that it's also not our job as a country to provide data for the whole world. Did we really believe that as we flew more and more sensors and invented more sensors and produced more data, that we and the American taxpayer would just continue to be able to pay for all of it forever? I don't think so. I mean, if you think about that too long, I don't think anybody would really agree that that wouldn't maybe come down to earth at some point. We need to find new ways of doing this. And the interesting thing is that we do have examples of organizations, they're multinational corporations, that are planetary scale data institutions. I would bet that the vast majority of this room is carrying probably all of these companies' sensors in your pockets right now. They have instrumented the entire planet. We carry their sensors. They've instrumented the world through us. They have tons of data and they make a ton of money off of it. And good for them. I mean, it's great. They do interesting things. There are also other issues that come from this. The truth being that they actually govern now, and they don't necessarily recognize that they're governing the world. Maybe some of them do, and that's a little bit scary, but they govern. And That's weird, right? But it's interesting because it also demonstrates what's possible. Now here's a controversial statement, or it might seem a little provocative or whatever, but as we think about those companies, and as we think about environmental data and who pays for it and things like that, there's another thing that we need to consider, which is the fact that data might be best served through a monopoly, in the sense that I don't like the idea of investor-owned monopolies of data about humans. I think there's some serious problems with that. But if we think about environmental data, one of the reasons I would argue that the commercial satellite sector has routinely had such a hard time has been that there's not a lot of room in the market for many optical Earth observing satellites. There's just, you don't need that many. It's very, very hard to compete on the quality of data if it's mostly the same. And so I believe that data should be treated kind of like utility. A lot of observational data should be treated like utilities, the same way power utilities and water utilities in areas, you don't want lots of them competing with one another. It just doesn't quite make sense. And so we have to figure out, how do we do this? And the nice thing here, and I think one thing the internet's is really well poised to do, is to create what are called cooperative data utilities, or what I would call a cooperative data utility. So the idea of a cooperative utility is something that already exists, which is a lot of rural power plants are cooperatives. They're owned by the farmers in the regions where they live. They all pitch in. They say, we need a power plant. Let's go in on it together. We have some examples of cooperative data utilities if you look the right way at them right now. ICANN, which manages the domain name system, it's kind of like a data utility. I mean, the data is just like a huge list of names and numbers, but they manage that for everybody. It is a nonprofit. It's not governed specifically as a cooperative, but it functions pretty well. And the internet works pretty well in terms of that layer of it. The domain name system works. GS1 is one of my favorites because we all interact with it, but no one knows what it is. Does anyone know what GS1 is? Okay. The last time I gave this presentation, somebody said it. They're like, it's the barcode people. It's the barcode people. If you need a barcode, you pay GS1, it'll issue you a barcode. So if you want to sell something at Target, you need a barcode. Where do you get that? GS1 was started in the 60s. When barcodes first emerged as a thing that you could do, all the retailers were like, how do we do this? And this is apocryphal, but I'm pretty sure the story is Walmart was oh, we'll do it. We have the technology for this. You can license it from us. And everybody was like, no, we're not doing that. Let's create a consortium. And so there's a nonprofit called GS1 that does this. And so same thing. It's just a list of numbers that are just barcodes, but they manage this as a nonprofit. And it's just undergirds the entire economy. GLIFE is another one. It's the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, which is basically, so we have international banks and things like that, and more global trade. We need to have a common identifier for legal entities that are transacting in the marketplace. So we can do this. These are all lists of identifiers and stuff like that are somewhat cooperatively maintained. But I think it's an ideal worth pursuing. I think cooperatives they're a big part of our economy. I live in Seattle. There are a lot of hippies around and stuff like that. I mean, it's not Vermont, but there are lots of similar vibes. I mean, we have Vashon Island, for example. There are a lot of hippies around, but this is not just a hippie thing. Cooperatives are a big part of the economy. They're huge corporations that are cooperatives. REI is actually a homegrown, consumer-owned cooperative. And a lot of technology infrastructures also run as cooperatives. So I think there's a lot of potential here. How am I doing on time? Sorry. Okay, great. Okay. I think there's a lot of potential for us to consider this approach, and one in which, rather than saying, let's hope that NOAA or NASA will fund everything forever, can we create more consortia or more cooperatives of stakeholders that actually need the data and actually use it and are willing to pay for it accordingly, can pitch in to deploy sensors and produce data and things like that. I don't think this is a totally crazy idea. And I'm very lucky, I'm very glad that we live in a future where something like MethaneSat could exist, right? So MethaneSat, rest in peace. It's very sad. I mean, when I was preparing this presentation and I wanted to find a picture for the slide, there was the Wikipedia, the MethaneSat was an American satellite. And it's like, whenever like a famous person dies and you go to their Wikipedia page and it's like, it's immediately been changed to like, they were an actor or whatever. It's very sad. But, and I have friends that worked on methane sat, but like also like long live methane sat. It's so awesome that the Environmental Defense Fund like showed that we can do this. You know, they launched a satellite, it saw first light. Yeah, then it got lost. Anyone who works in space knows like, yeah, we expected that. I mean, that, or, you know, that's definitely a possible outcome. You know, no one's like surprised by it. But it shows that we can do it. We can do it again. And so, and methane sat was a collaborative effort. A lot of our international science projects are collaborative efforts, but I think we should start treating them more like cooperatives where we get more stakeholders involved, including like corporations, including, you know, companies that actually might have a financial benefit of benefiting from this data and make sure that they pitch in. I think that's fair. And so I think we will get more things like methane sat. I have some friends, Bill Greer and Rhiannon Price, who some of you might know those names, but they're working on a thing called Common Space, where they're raising money for humanitarian Earth observing satellites. So basically, they do not want to be beholden to the normal stakeholders that fund most of the Earth observing satellites and their restrictions and their priorities, and say, well, look, I think we are at the point where you can, there are companies out there, I forget what they're called, but like you can like white label a satellite. They'll build a satellite for you and you can determine your own mission. So they're working on figuring out how could we use philanthropic funding and a broader consortium approach to fly our own satellite in service of humanitarian purposes. So it's a wild idea. And then I'm sorry, I'm gonna plug my own thing here, but like Source Cooperative, it's in the name. It's designed to be a cooperative, which is to say, I think that we should have data sharing infrastructure that is not reliant on university overhead funding, because that's not super reliable maybe anymore, or really just kind of like any one institution or any one agency that are sort of increasingly subject to pressure from all sorts of places. I'll just say that. And so if sharing data is a generically solvable problem, which I believe it is, I think taking a cooperative generic approach to solving it might be somewhat more durable. And so the part of the vision of Source Cooperative is that we don't, right now we're in beta, it's free, we have free capacity thanks to AWS and Azure, but we can host data, but in the future, we want to say like, no, if you want to publish data, you should pay accordingly to the volume of data that you have, but you're not, you and everyone else that's publishing data there is funding the substrate that's available to everybody. And so if there are shocks to the system and somebody loses funding, the whole thing doesn't fall over, or the whole, the portal doesn't go down. Anyway, happy to talk about that. And then this is the other thing that I'm just super optimistic about, which is that like we live in a time where like we've never had more capacity to build planetary scale collaborations. Like the internet, I'm a huge fan still. The internet, it's been weird in a lot of ways, but like it is enabling global cooperation in a way that's just like astonishing. And it's still so early. Like we're still figuring this out. So the business models that we have now, that the internet, that we interact with now is based on, those are our first attempts. It's still so early. And so I think now is really the time to be very curious and think a little bit bigger. And also, so the metaphor of gazelles is also a call to think somewhat smaller in terms of how we build global institutions, which is that rather than building very large, grandiose things that will, fix poverty or save the environment, we should have more institutions that are much more narrowly focused on saying, we are going to produce the best methane observations in the world. And if you need those, you should pitch in and fund them. And I think we can have more focused, smaller organizations that do this. And so I call them gazelles. Anyway, there's a blog post about this if you want more. And then I'll just close with this. I want to get through this pretty quickly so we have time for questions. But this is another provocative idea, which is, what if we paid people to work on hard and meaningful challenges? Like, one thing that I've found very galling recently, and through a lot of the discussions, of what's going on in this new policy environment that we're in, is how divorced a lot of the sort of public sector and public interest work is from the labor market. We have some like the smartest people in the world in this room, and we're just like, hey, you should get paid way less than other people. And I think that's wrong. I think to me, that's a sign of market failure. I think it's a sign of institutional failure. I mean, this is a weird one. I look to Singapore as an example here, but Singapore is always weird. You don't want to compare anyone to Singapore because it's like a small island, like it's a dictatorship. But they do some things pretty well. And one of the things they do well is they pay their public servants really, really well. They're like, you have an important job. You should be really smart and good at what you do, and you should be paid appropriately. We don't want you to be constantly looking over your shoulder for a better job that pays you, I don't know, 10 times as much as what we're paying you, which, it's just so weird to see for example, the federal government really want to do interesting things in AI while Meta is paying people like $100 million to come join them in their AI teams. It's like completely bonkers on both ends. I mean, I think that the labor market for technology is super weird right now. But generally, I think we really do need to figure out how to get industry and the market to pay people with your skills more, and so whether that's in existing institutions, that's a fight to be fought, but also because as a lot of these institutions are crumbling or are otherwise being buffeted, we can say, I'm just trying to be polite here, there's work to be done. There's very, very important work to be done. And so, and there's also a jobs crisis. This is not just an AI thing, this is just globally. There are a lot of people entering the labor market and we don't have enough jobs for them. And so the World Bank has identified a number of sectors that are very relevant to people in this room that are going to drive a lot of job creation. And so I think from a policy standpoint and industrial policy standpoint, we really need to be hammering on this. And I think our community of people who are interested in geospatial data need to assert ourselves more as being like, hey, it turns out we actually have a lot of the skills that are needed to fix the economy and solve a lot of global challenges. What we're swimming upstream, though, because we do have outdated educational models, and this is where I really feel bad. I don't want to hurt too many people's feelings here, but like the way that we're training, the educational pathways we have for geospatial professionals are out of date. And industry is adopting more and more modern practices more and more quickly. And so the gap between what kids are learning at school and what's needed in the workforce is ever widening. To the point that a lot of employers are increasingly interested in psychometric tests, skills credentials, skills assessments, and things like that, rather than degrees. And then this last one is completely nuts. So there's some research from the National Bureau of Economic Research showing that the GI Bill actually lost people money. It damaged their earnings. So this is the paper you can see, but the paper is called "You Can't Handle the Truth." It's so good. So they evaluated the GI Bill post 9/11 and basically found it's like if you had veterans go, get grants and loans or whatever to go to school to get a 4-year degree instead of entering the workforce, they were worse off at the end of that 4 years because they're out of the labor market and they didn't get skills that they needed to get a good job. And so they just lost time on the job. And so that's, now look, you all are like PhDs and stuff like that. Like we're talking about, there's a lot of people in the economy that need trade skills. And I actually think there's a lot of room in the data sector for more people with kind of like trade type skills that we need to start educating. So I'm gonna fly through this. I don't want to read just these stats to you, but the point is like, you get the point. This is something that there's an opportunity here for. A lot of money is going to be going into climate, and I think a lot of jobs with skills like the ones that are that are in this room and that your colleagues have are the kind of things that should be getting better jobs. And so we're in a good position to do this. We have started with CNG experimenting with badges. Like, could we do this? Could we start issuing badges or credentials that the market recognizes as being good skills assessments? But it's still early days for that. So I'll leave it at that, and then we can go to questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you. If we can get the Slido up with questions, that would be a great place to start. And you guys can all enter your questions and vote them up. Great slides. I appreciated it.
Sure. I can share the slides with anybody too if you want.
I was curious when I saw the gazelles. I spent some time, many people in this room know I've spent some time in Botswana.
Oh.
And the leaping that they do, I believe it's called spronking, which
Really?
is just a fun word.
Oh.
Since you like words.
Okay, yeah.
And I was thinking about like kind of, it's almost like a leapfrogging. I was like, oh, where are we going with the gazelles? So I was kind of excited about that.
Man, it's like a new model. Let's spronk. Like let's spronk together.
I believe you see it. They'll do it like when they're being chased by a predator, because it's very confusing for the predator to pick one out from the herd. So
The metaphor gets better and better,
it gets
too.
better and better, yeah.
Because if Doge comes from you, you got a sprunk. Yeah, okay.
Oh, how I'll fill dead air. So what are your thoughts on the current hype on building Earth Science Foundation models in the context of the gazelle comment?
I mean, I think there's a lot of room for experimentation right now with foundation models, and so actually, okay, well, we'll keep going on the gazelle metaphor. A feature of the herd is that gazelles die sometimes, and the herd keeps going, and that's fine. So now is a really cool time for people to be experimenting with foundation models. I'm actually very happy, and there's tons of research happening at like lots of universities and Microsoft research, and people are trying to build startups doing this sort of thing. Other nonprofits are working on it. So I'm very happy with this moment in that like there's a lot of people taking swings at bat. I'm not optimistic that there's like a model or a solution that's really gonna like take the market. It's just, and I also can't tell. Like the AI market is so weird, and also, yeah, we all know this. The geospatial market's really weird and bad. Like it's just very hard for people to really take off here. So I'm happy with what's going on, which is a lot of research and flailing. That's the right thing to be doing right now. So
Flailing can be good. Oh, it keeps moving on me. There we go. How would you compare data co-ops of small non-governmental institutions to the notion of grid computing?
Yeah.
Once envisioned before cloud computing.
So the grid computing, so actually this is an interesting one. I almost wrote a paper about, earlier this year about, I can't remember what the grid's called, the CMIP grid. ESGF, yeah, about ESGF. But I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to like give Doge any like pointers on where to look to cause problems. But it's just like, you go to the ESGF page, it's like NSF, NOAA, Department of Energy, like it is very so like the short answer is like, a lot of these small non-governmental institutions are still way too dependent on one country or a few countries or something like that. And I think what I think, and this is provocative, is that I think we need to create mechanisms for the commercial sector to come in as well. You know, I think we're coming culturally out of a century or so where the U.S. government was the only institution that had the wherewithal and the capacity to build a lot of these sensors and do this kind of stuff. So we just always assumed like they're the only ones that could do it. But the truth is there are many more stakeholders that are capable of doing stuff. So I would say like, hey, if you're an insurance firm or a reinsurance firm, or if climate risk is important to you, or you're a bank, you should pitch in to ESGF. Like that's fair. I think there's been lots of discussion over the years of like charging for Landsat, and I think I'm very glad that Landsat is open. But I also think it would probably be fair for some of the big firms that like they require Landsat for their massive corporations, operations and stuff like that, they should pay a little bit more their fair share than just expecting the taxpayer to foot everything. So
We could have a whole talk on open versus free, and that they're not the same, right?
No.
Right? I mean, it takes money to do the things that we do. Similar to the where do you sign up for the 10x paycheck? That's one I'm pretty passionate about. Just because the work you are doing is good work and is for a cause doesn't mean that you shouldn't be compensated for the work that you do. I could go on that one.
Yeah.
But we'll go to the next one. How do we effectively tie data to knowledge when cognitive dissonance is real and we are all living in different silos? That's a huge question.
Who asked that? Yeah. I mean, I'll go back to the mission of Radiant Earth. The goal is a shared understanding of the world. And there are many, many ways to interpret data. And I see it as just a continual conversation of being, there's a phrase, I think like some weird Silicon Valley, I don't know if they're called like rationalists or whatever, but like whatever. These people who go on the philosophical deep dives and stuff like that. But there's I think a website called Less Wrong, which I think is the right way to describe it, which is like, we should just continually aspire to be less wrong, assuming that like we are feeling our way in the dark and we don't know. So big question. I don't quite know the answer, but I think that it's an act of faith, I would say, that undergirds our work, which is that we hope that by making more and more accurate data available to people, we'll find our way together. So.
I'll make an early plug for the unconference. we have an unconference this afternoon. If there are questions up here that you all want to dig into, you could propose that as an unconference session, and we could dig into how do we effectively tie data and knowledge. So just throwing that out there. Let's see. Rather than reinventing the wheel, are there ways to take advantage of the infrastructure those 4 big companies have for humanity over profit?
So yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of the companies. Like they've done amazing work, and the market is working really well to sort of keep pushing them. I mean, I always say like we have enough competition in the cloud sector that like performance is continually getting better, costs are continually going down. Even though some costs have maybe seemed like they've flattened, but like you can get a lot of stuff out of them. I'm very proud of the open data program at AWS, and I think, you know, Google Earth Engine has like been a gift to humanity. I do think that we're reaching a point where, and I'll just say it out loud, like I do have daydreams sometimes of Bill Gates convening a CEO roundtable of the cloud providers, which is what he did for the pharmaceutical companies to get them to collaborate on vaccines, and say, hey guys, look, this is not a huge part of your business and you're never going to make a ton of money off of it, but like commit to making sure that like lots and lots of data is available for a long time. I think we're at a point where I think we can make that happen collaboratively with them. But yeah, we should work with them. They're very good at what they do. But we should also not, I also just say, focus on the commodity layer of technologies. Now that I don't work at AWS, I can say that like more emphatically. It's just like, forget about whatever like AWS like really wants you to focus on the generic stuff that you can use on any cloud. I'm deliberately not making eye contact with Chris as I say this. Yeah, they're great.
I'm going to use for your last question this one.
Sure.
A lot of the questions I think that have been posed to Jed, I'm like, wow, that's an impossible question to answer, and I'm glad he's up there and not me. So when we think about the risk to data and data that is disappearing or being harder to find, what's your take on fighting to save it or letting people actually see the consequences? You know, sometimes you don't miss something until it's gone. So I'm going to leave you with that one question.
Yeah, I'll drop a few bombs on the way out. Like, I would say like, yeah, all right. So this is the kind of mean thing that I'll say is that there are a lot of institutions that have been around for a long time that over time they become very good at shielding themselves from any kind of accountability. Some of them seem like they're almost entirely designed to do that. And their procurement processes are designed to do that. And management practices are designed to do that. So as a result, we are in a position right now where like a lot of data is at risk and no one can answer the questions of like, well, what's going to happen if this goes away? Like which of this data is more valuable than other data? And people are like, well, we've never let ourselves ask that question before. So I don't know, and we don't know. And so now we're in a position where it is possible that like the only way to learn if the data is valuable is to pull the plug and see what happens. I don't like that situation. And so my gut is like, look, we should try to back up a bunch of stuff. We should try to get people to agree on like how to prioritize what should be backed up. But that, you know, this conversation's been going on all year and it's still pretty murky from my perspective. I think we should probably back most of it up, but I also think we need to like, I'm much more interested in this future conversation, which is like, how do we make sure that we're producing data that we really understand? We're being much more thoughtful about what are these products, who are they for, what do we expect to get out of them, how much do they cost to produce, things like that. With, again, the caveat that also I want to make sure that we have plenty of affordances for us to experiment with weird stuff where we don't have clear answers on what things are for. But yeah, unfortunately, I think we're just dealing with the fact that some people have managed to dodge accountability for a long time, and now they don't have good answers to defend themselves, and that's a problem. So anyway, I'm still optimistic. So thanks.
Thank you.
I do always try to warn any of our plenary speakers, like, one, you guys will never disappoint in your questions and never be afraid to go technical. But today, what I really like is, last night at dinner, we were talking about what sessions are you most looking forward to coming up? And my dinner table was pretty technical, right? We talked about chunking and reproducible workflows, and we talked about all kinds of things that most of which I sort of understood. But what I love is that with the opportunity of a plenary, we have a challenge to think differently and to think broadly about the implications of our work, not just how we get it done, but the impacts that work has on the broader world. I'm going to just quickly walk you through the rest of our time together here. So this afternoon, we have our unconference. This is an audience participation kind of thing. If everybody sits back, the unconference will be really boring, right? I know that we have some sheets by registration. If you have ideas that you would like to see discussed in the unconference, you can put them up there so that others can get inspired by those ideas and think about where they want to spend their time this afternoon. I know there's already one really great idea up there, but we have room for multiple unconference sessions. So what will happen is shortly before, I believe it's right around 2, I have to look at the sched exactly, those people who have unconference ideas, we will pitch those ideas. So you will hear what the range of options are. We're going to have our folks online vote which ideas they want to attend so that we put the ones with the most online interest in rooms that have good AV so that they can participate most robustly. There will be one Zoom room for the folks that are online, and then there will be breakout rooms for each of the topics. So they can move between rooms in the same way that you all can freely move between rooms when you're here in person. Some of our best content, some of our best discussions happen in the unconference because we know that the world has changed a lot today from where it was during our call for sessions a few months ago. So bring all those great ideas, all those conversations that you're like, oh, I wish we could have talked about that at ESIP. The unconference is your time for that. Then we have our Funding Friday posters. I will tell you, last year, an idea that was discussed in the unconference, the group said, man, we could, if there was just a little bit of seed money to be the catalyst so that we advanced this and actually took this idea and actually did something with it, as opposed to thought, well, that'd be really cool if only, right? They turned it into a Funding Friday poster. So we will gather in the hotel lobby bar where the music was last night. We will have posters, we will have markers. It's very low tech. You pitch your idea. General attendees, the prize is $5,000. There will be 3 of those. Teachers and students, the prize is $3,000, and there will be 2 or 3 of those, depending, it kind of depends how many posters we get. You sketch out your idea. If you don't have an idea, but you come and you just encourage others and you ask them about it. You poke holes in their ideas. You ask them, hey, well, have you talked to this person over here? They would be great to work with, right? So we encourage them in their ideas. And then we start off Friday morning with our Funding Friday pitches. It's really fun. It's a little chaotic. I apologize to the folks online. There is no way for me to do this virtually. Maybe next year we'll find a way. Maybe Steve's shaking his head. Steve brought in the cameras today. It's hard just with all the sound in the room, but I don't know. We'll see. Steve's already thinking about it, I can tell. So we will start Friday morning with those Funding Friday pitches. All the rules and eligibility are on our website. We can get that for you if you have questions. Unfortunately, feds, I can't give you money. That's how it works. There's a few other things like that, but we have it all outlined online for you. And then we will close tomorrow. There's great breakout sessions in between. We will close tomorrow with our annual business meeting. So this is part of ESIP's governance, part of how our partner assembly and the community are who guide ESIP. Once a year, I and accountability need to talk to you about how ESIP is doing, right? What I see ahead for ESIP. And last year we did that interactively. I kind of provided some context and then we got feedback from all of you. We want to do that again this year. So we will have an interactive exercise. It will not just be a one-way flow of information. So I hope that all of you stay all the way through. We will have lunch to send you off after that session. And that's kind of your orientation for the rest of the week. So thank you again to Jed and Kate for their great talks this morning. I look forward to wonderful breakout sessions the rest of today and tomorrow morning. And I just hope you have a great rest of your week with us.